a group of civil society groups held a press conference on Thursday in Kaduna to speak about several things that they said are happening in some Middle Belt states, and they complained about uh, people taking over the land and bringing new people to settle on those lands. With me to discuss this issue today is the spokesperson of the 22 organizations which held the press conference, Barrister Gloria Balason. You are welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, what was the purpose of today's press conference?
We are very concerned as a coalition of civil society about the killings that are going on in Plateau, in Benue State, in Nassarawa, in parts of Gombe, also in Taraba. And we're concerned because of the geography of where these killings are taking place. Because these are not states that are within the borderlines of Nigeria. These are states within the central zone of Nigeria. And to have many parts of this state under reference being taken over by terrorists while we have a government is totally unacceptable. We have also heard the presidency mention that the state governors should take action in terms of ensuring security in the states. That is problematic because security is under the exclusive legislative list. That's one. Second, there is no governor of any of these states who have the proper assets, the right assets to be able to address the security concerns. So what this means is that we require the joint forces of both the federal government and the state government, and indeed the communities, for them to be able to keep these states and communities that have been beleaguered by attacks safe enough for people to exist.
Yeah, you spoke about several communities being taken over. Do you have evidence, or what are the names of which of the communities are you talking about?
Now, in Plateau State alone, we have as many as 154 communities. In Kaduna State, we're still compiling the list. Benue is worst hit. And we're talking about communities where the people have to vacate the premises because bandit terrorists have come. In Kaduna, for instance, you would have communities like in Kachia local government, in Birningwari local government, in Chikun local government. These are whole swaths of lands where people who are autochthonous to those communities have been sacked by bandit terrorists. In some states, in some parts of this state, what you even find, as the case is in Kaduna, is that people who have attempted to return to their indigenous communities have been killed. Some of them were there are dead bodies thrown into the well, as is the case in Birnengwari and in Chukun. So these are troublesome situations that need to be addressed. And we are very concerned because there is an oncoming census. And so, where people illegally take over these lands and the real inhabitants are not there, when census happens, it will be deemed that those who have ransacked and sacked the members of the communities are those who own the land. So, the federal government really needs to zero in its own intervention to ensure that every land that has been overtaken by terrorist bandits are reclaimed and given to the right owners. I think it's important to use that as a first line charge in terms of restoring peace and security and justice to communities, as well as also ensuring that the killings stop immediately.
You also spoke in the press conference about foreigners coming in. What evidence do you really have that foreigners are being brought in to occupy those lands?
Early this week, the commander, the GOC in Plateau State raised an alarm. The army raised an alarm of an influx of cattle moving into the plateau. Now, this is not us. This is the army itself raising an alarm. And that the army of the Federal Republic of Nigeria will raise an alarm is worrisome because citizens are to raise the alarm. And if the army raises the alarm, what we expect that they do is that they address the matter immediately. Now, the Plateau State is within the central area. Central. If these people are coming in, it means that they have overtaken communities and states in the borders of Nigeria and have moved to the center. How did they find their way from the borderlines to come into the country in the middle belt? So if you cannot find security for those in the central part of the country, you cannot possibly find security for those who are within the borderline states of the country. And so this is why we think that it is very important that the federal government takes this matter seriously. We're also concerned that we are building a state that does not address fully the concerns of victims. They zero in on perpetrators. So you find a lot of attention given to perpetrators while the victim communities become double victims of a Nigerian state that doesn't pay attention to finding resolution to these problems. Now, whether these communities that have been overtaken were under the Tinubu administration or under the Buhari administration or indeed before it, what is important is that government is a continuum. So it is important that these issues are addressed as matters of justice, that everybody whose land has been overtaken, people who have been sacked from their communities should be returned back to their ancestral lands. And those who have done this sacking or killings, thankfully, in criminal law, you have no time limitation. So the statute of limitation doesn't catch up on crimes. It's important that these things are dealt with because once you don't deal with crimes, you continue to build a body of criminality that now becomes a state act. And this will then define what our territory, our Nigerian state looks like. And we are concerned that we're now having a Nigerian state where criminals feel like they can overrun the authority of the federal government and the state governments and still get away with it. This requires concerted effort by both the federal government, the state government, and indeed the citizens to rise up and stack up their spine and say no more shall this happen. Now, we recognize the fact that there are many of these kind of press conferences that have been released, but the one we released today is different because we made clear point issues around how these matters can be resolved. In Kaduna State, for instance, under Governor Nasir El-Rufai, there were communities that were declared persona non grata. The governor simply just sacked a community like Adara and said that they are not a people. This was a first-class chiefdom. There were also chiefdoms that were renamed arbitrarily, and so their identities were distorted. Under the Rome Statute, when you desecrate cultural heritages, it is regarded as a war crime. But what is even worse is that you even have territories that were also boundaries that were shifted by executive fiat without altering or amending the constitution. Now, these are all pending issues that need to be addressed. So whether it is in Benue, where there has been this consistent attack by bandit terrorists, there needs to be the fundamental question around who are those who are funding these criminal actions, and how is it that it has continued over and unabated for 20 years, and what can we do to be able to address it? A few weeks ago, indeed a few months ago, we had the security advisor, the DSS security, national security advisor, give the example of Bogoro in Bauchi State and how that they're a resilient community that rose up against terrorists. While that is stellar, the reality is that you cannot ask communities that have no power to take up arms to then confront those who come with superior firepower. Because what it will seem like is that you are asking people with razor blades to confront those who are coming against them with AK-49s. That is not a good balance of power and terror for them to be able to do it rightly. So it is still the state that has the constitutional duty of ensuring the balance of power and striking out and wiping out criminal elements out of our country so that we can have a country where peace and justice reigns.
The spokespersons to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Bayo Nanuga, said some weeks ago that the case in Plateau State is not a case of terrorism, but that of communities that should learn how to live together in peace. You are saying that the case that is not the case. Now, what do you really want? What were the things that you I wanted government to do? You spoke. You have some points here. Four points that you want government to attend to. The government has said, like you quoted, that communities should help to defend themselves. How do you reconcile what you are requesting government to do and the fact that government is asking for community resilience?
So let us even go back to the reaction of the government on these matters. You quoted Bayo Onanuga and how that he said that it is not a case of terrorism, but communities refusing to live in peace. That is quite unfortunate because there is no empirical evidence to the sweeping statement that the spokesperson made. And we find that convenient because he wanted to sublet the duty of the federal government to the states. This same kind of statement was used in Benue State, where they have had consistent attacks. And the government, in trying to sublet their own duty, would say, oh, state governments should fix it. But again, no state governor has the security assets to be able to address this. It is the office of the commander in chief that can deploy forces and make the directives that are required for us to have peace and security in these areas. Now, to the point around the government saying that security is everybody's business, and then speaking to community resilience. Um, it needs to be made clear that no community that only has the ability for surveillance will be able to withstand or indeed meet security the superior firepower that these terrorists come against the communities with. Now, we don't even want a situation where the terrorists attack. We're saying that the security reports that are received by our security agents need to be used to forestall attacks, because the death of one Nigerian is one death too many. In the Plateau, uh, in the last week, we have the concern that the army itself has raised should show the federal government that this is a matter that requires concerted attention. Now, for many politicians, their concern is about the elections. You cannot have elections in areas that are beleaguered by bandits attacks. And so it is also in their own interest to ensure that all of these places are safe, assuming without conceding that they don't care about human lives. There is also the concern that with the conversation on the coming census, that every community should have their right people numbered, and not that they have these bandits numbered amongst them. There is also the need also to ensure that other issues that have arisen before now that needs to be addressed, say for instance, the lack of prosecution of those who are involved in this terrorism, including their sponsors, the perpetrators, the enablers, need to be revisited. So we need the judiciary itself to be able to apply the right sanctions that will make it difficult for people to find this as a lucrative trade. So while we speak about community resilience, one of the things that should concern the country and indeed the federal government is that in allowing this matter fester, we now build a situation where communities will have a situation of victims transiting into combatants. Because once victims do not have the kind of justice that they require, they are going to curate their own kind of justice. In that scenario, there is nobody who will then be able to supervise the balance of terror. We're going to have anarchy. So it is in the best interest of the federal government that they take the right measures that are required. Now, we do know that the federal government, particularly the presidency, has made a directive for previous lands, for lands that were seized by terrorists, to be returned back to them. We require more than pronouncement to make this happen. There is a need for both the executive will and the political will to ensure that these matters are fully addressed. So, as they are addressing these matters, let it also be known in the public domain that these issues are being addressed, so that if there are bandit terrorists in other areas, or indeed terrorists of any name and calling, they will know that they cannot get away with it. Now, for the new frontiers of terrorism that we have in Niger and Kwara, it needs to be nipped in the bud very quickly before we have an additional challenge of security in our hands without having the right security assets and numbers to be able to contain it.
Yeah, one of your demands is that there should be a reform of the Firearms Act of 2004. What are you really looking for?
Now, on that reform questions the fluid manner in which perpetrators and terrorists are able to move around with firearms very freely, while communities do not have the same powers. Now, the Firearms Act should serve as a protection to communities and not to be against them. Because once communities are not armed, and yet you have this fluid way in which terrorists are able to take up arms and to wipe out communities without any deterrence, then we have to question what the Firearms Act is addressing. Because the idea of the Firearms Act is to put the firearms only in the arms of the government so that they'll be able to address the security concerns. But if government has not been able to do that and has come out to say that communities should build resilience and should also be part of the security situation, then they have to be able to empower communities to take up arms under supervision for them now to be able to match up the terror with what is coming against them by the bandit terrorists.
Yeah, in the last few minutes, I've been speaking with Barrister Gloria Balason, the Executive Director of the House of Justice in Kaduna. I want to ask you, Barrister Gloria, you also spoke about the restoration of chiefdoms that were scrapped and those whose names were changed. This happened in which states? And what are the names of those chiefdoms that were scrapped?
So this happened in Kaduna State, specifically in southern Kaduna, under the Governor Nasser El-Rufai regime. The Adara chiefdom, for instance, was scrapped by the governor. It's a terrible case in which the chief had returned from a meeting with the governor only to be attacked and killed, along with some of his aides. And a few weeks after, the chiefdom itself was scrapped. Aside from the Adara chiefdom, you have all the chiefdoms in southern Kaduna renamed by the El-Rufai government. You also have certain chiefs that were deposed in the last week of the stay of Governor Nasir El-Rufai. So the Etumnumana, for instance, and two other chiefs were deposed in the last few days, in the last week of Governor Nasir El-Rufai. That needs to be revisited. In southern Kaduna, you have communities like, for instance, the Angan chiefdom was changed, the name was changed, the Baju chiefdom was changed. Every chiefdom in southern Kaduna, their names were changed arbitrarily. Now, no government has the right to define the identity of a people because culture is something that has evolved over time and it is precious and is at the very root of the existence and the identity of the people. And so, people in government, indeed, even politicians, should not feel that they have the powers which they do not possess to change the identities of people. So this needs to be addressed. You also have areas where the boundaries were shifted by executive fiat by the government. The issue of boundary shifting is not something that a state governor can do. It is a federal government issue. So these are all pending matters that need to be addressed. And when it comes to livestock, like every other business, is personal business. And people who run their businesses cannot run it at the detriment of communities. If a person is running a livestock business, then they have to be able to keep their livestock in such a way that they do not become nuisance to other communities. If the farmer is farming, it is his duty to ensure that he farms within his own territory. But as you would know, the challenge has always been that it is the bandit terrorists who come against farming communities. This is also raising a fundamental challenge of food security in the country. So if you have Plateau State, Nassarawa State, and Benue State, which is the food basket region of the country, attacked, then we have a looming food security challenge that is going to affect the rest of the country. And we must be concerned. Now, we do recognize that the issue of insecurity is not just tied to the Middle Belt alone. Even the Southwest is being affected and part of the South-South. All of these issues need to be addressed all at once. We cannot afford to allow our country to be to be profiled by criminals who think that they can terrorize law-abiding citizens and define who we are as a people. And this is a call that the government itself needs to take very seriously, that we take back our country and remold it in such a way that the young people who we are giving birth to now will not think that we are a country of terrorists, will not think that we're a country who do not care about children, but that we care about the peace and security and justice of the people, and that criminals are punished and law-abiding citizens are kept safe.
Now, as we run off, Barrister Gloria Balason, I want to ask, what if, in the instance of these chiefdoms that were scrapped and whose names were changed, if the government, the new government in Kaduna State, does not take any action, would that be the end of the matter, or do you have further steps that are available to you?
Certainly, we will challenge the matter in court.
Now, well, finally, I would like to ask you, what will you wish that the federal government does in the next, as a response to what you have called it to do? What are your expectations of the federal government?
The president himself needs to visit these areas, and the federal government needs to also attend to the palliatives that are required to help communities start up again. But it is only humane that the president shows up in these areas that have been suffering from this crisis, to show human concern about the people that he is leading. If they can show up in these areas during election, then it is even a better cause to show up when the people are going through hardship. And I think that by showing up also, the government will be able to assess the damage and to see the urgency of why there needs to be intervention. And so we're calling on the federal government to timeously act on these matters so that there will not be an escalation of violence.
So thank you very much for coming. We'll be calling you again to speak as the need arises.
Thank you for having me, and have a good day.
Time.